Okay, now we're just going to take you in matters of transport to a briefing by Fikile Mbalula, the minister, who's holding this press conference this morning following his consultation with the taxi industry. This comes after the National Taxi Alliance and the South African National Taxi Council said they will be increasing taxi fares. Let's listen.
Our mandate as a sector is that of a catalyst which enables mobility in the economy and social setting. However, we are enjoined to execute this mandate responsibly and in a manner that ensures that the preservation of human life remains sacrosanct. The hard choices we have to make as a nation are premised on the centrality of the right to life and our singular commitment to uphold this right above all else. Not everyone will be happy with these choices, some of which have been hard and will undoubtedly change our way of life. However, we must never forget the reason we make these difficult choices in the first place: to preserve human life. We are equally duty-bound to ensure that ours is not a sector that will enable the rampant spread of the virus. The measures that we put in place and continue to revise from time to time are meant to mitigate against this spread through various transport modes. As a sector, our planning and interventions, can you maintain social distance at the door? I don't know why there is stampede, please. As a sector, our planning and interventions have always been mindful of both the prevailing conditions and also contemplate life post-COVID-19. In adapting our long-term transport strategy to the COVID-19 pandemic and its implication for the sector, we have taken a long-term view that defines a legacy that COVID-19 will leave behind and how, as a sector, we should adapt to the new normal. Measures to stimulate the economy post-lockdown include gradual resumption of operations across all modes. Equally, a number of our entities that play a strategic role in our economy and whose role is central in accelerating the recovery of the economy have borne the brunt of pandemic and have required urgent financial support. Aviation. Our immediate response to the pandemic, when the country entered a hard lockdown, we closed our airspace to all air traffic, both domestic and international. This followed fast on the heels of similar closures of airspace by the vast majority of countries around the world. This has negatively impacted revenues for airlines, airport authorities, navigation services, as well as civil aviation authorities. The aviation sector worldwide has been severely impacted by the pandemic. Ours has not been an exception. Our airport company, AXA, has been hardest hit as all its revenue streams were affected. This has been further worsened by the credit rating downgrade earlier in the year. The ATNS SACA have been equally impacted and will require support to achieve recovery as quickly as possible. And I heard yesterday in Parliament during the Q&A with the President, one MP saying that aviation domestic limited opening has been the most insecure. It's highly secured, and in terms of mitigating the possible infection that people may get on the airlines. And we have opened the Golden Cycle limited service, which is Kinshasa, Cape Town, as well as OR Tambo. Now, we have explained all the measures, so that it will be 100% occupation on board in terms of the airlines, and that among other measures we have taken, we have introduced HEPA, which is high efficiency particulate air filters in all the airlines, and which mitigate the possible spread of the virus on board. And we have intensified measures such as sanitation and all of that on board, and compulsory, mandatory fitting of masks to all passengers on board. Now, as to whether or not all those measures are not helpful, it is something to be seen and to be interrogated from time to time. But over and above that, that is why we have not opened other airports inside South Africa, because each airport, before it is opened, must fit into the measures which are very strict that we have actually stipulated in the granting of permission for domestic travel as agreed by the net joints. So I know people of Port Elizabeth, I know of people of George, I know of people of the Free State and smaller airports also want their airspaces to be opened. And in the coming week, I will equally announce the opening, which is the second phase of those airports, having satisfied ourselves that all measures are in place. But as it goes, from the 15th, we're back in business. Of course, some of the airlines are highly affected, like ComAir, you know, is facing liquidation. So these are some of the measures we have introduced, but economic harshness it has actually brought to our industry. Unfortunately, ComAir had to undergo this, and SAA have got its own ups and downs that we are dealing with as cabinet through the minister designated, Pravin Gordhan. Similar to the aviation sector, we closed our seaports to passenger vessels and cruise liners at the beginning of the lockdown. This was in line with similar actions taken by other nations around the world. The impact on the maritime subsector has been equally devastating, both to the private sector and maritime authorities. Rail. At the beginning of the lockdown, we closed both long-distance passenger rail and commuter rail. Long-distance rail services such as Shosholoza Mail and Rovos Rail remains closed, while commuter rail has been permitted to operate in level 3. Gautrain services are fully operational, while METRORAIL services are projected to resume on the 1st of July, subject to stringent safety measures being implemented. The COVID pandemic has worsened PRASA's financial position, resulting in further cash constraints on an already strained financial situation. Roads. In the road space, both private operators and authorities were adversely impacted by the pandemic. This includes bus operators, driving schools, who call me all the time and ask about their relief. The driving schools operators, because they say also they are under our sector. But we'll explain in the statement how they are actually covered in terms of the relief. Courier companies and many others. Our road authorities such as the Road Traffic Management Corporations, where we are today, RTMC, the Road Traffic Infringement Agency, RTIA, and the South African Roads Agency Limited, SANRAL, have been adversely affected. SANRAL not only suffered from loss of revenue, but the delays in capital projects have also had an adverse effect. SANRAL access to capital markets is limited as a result of the sovereign downgrade earlier in the year. You know, we are dealing with a very difficult issue in the country, which is the e-tolls. And that has actually affected our capacity to borrow in the bond market in order to favor SANRAL's position that have been very much lucrative over the years. And that has affected us adversely because all that has stopped in relation to what we need to do, which we are going to, with regard to the e-tolls, have actually stalled capital projects. You can see potholes in the country starting to mushroom, but not, at a large scale, but all over. And also our capital projects that we have announced, which included Moloto Road and many others that were supposed to be rolling out, are actually affected. And SANRAL's position in terms of borrowing and all of that has been affected in terms of sovereign downgrade that it suffered earlier in the year. Because those who borrow money from, they say they don't care whether the cat is black or white, as long as a decision is taken around the e-tolls. That is what brings certainty in terms of the credibility of SANRAL to borrow over a period of time. In response to the plight of the industry, government has responded with a wide range of measures, central to which was a 500 billion relief package, which I saw somebody saying, where did this 500 billion went to? Like you want the boxes to be ticked as to what happened to the money. And the 500 billion relief package covering various sectors. Within this package, about 100 billion was set aside by the National Treasury to support job creation and support for SMME and informal business. As I was coming here, I read an article that about 200-something million or billion is in excess, not being spent on that money because of applications have actually been rejected. And those are issues that get to be considered in this particular environment. So this money is allocated and will be spent accordingly. Where there are challenges like UIF and all of that, all of those have been attended by ministers designated to address those and to ensure that money is well spent. This package is meant to support businesses in distress, save jobs, and secure wages for workers. It is equally meant for all sectors and businesses that qualify for relief, including those in the transport sector. In a similar manner, we'll make funding available for each of our departmental public entities adversely impacted by this pandemic. Discussions with the National Treasury are underway related to other financial instruments that may be employed to support the recovery of our departmental entities, which I have already mentioned. This is to ensure that they continue to play a strategic role in stimulating economic activity and providing support to the respective sectors as the economy resumes activity. We have further made resources available in the form of sanitizers, disinfectants, and other personal protective equipment in order to alleviate the procurement burden on the part of operators. A number of companies operating in the transport subsectors, ranging from bus operators, logistics firms, driving schools, and many others have approached us for relief support. We have provided adequate advice and redirected these companies to the government relief funds established for this purpose and the support they require. A number of companies in the transport subsector have experienced difficulties in accessing the relief funds or lodging their application. That speaks to what I saw on Business Tech this morning, that about 200 billion or so in excess have not been spent, and because some of the applications were basically rejected. And that will include applications also that come from our sector, from companies that are formalized, that are legit, that can also be assisted from their own applications, and that include the school driving, the license, school driver's license companies in our country. We have established dedicated capacity in the Department of Transport to help support these businesses to apply and access these relief funds. So that's what we have done. So those who want support, they can get in touch with the Department of Transport so that we help them to apply to access the funds that have been set aside by government in relation to relief. Due to peculiarities only applicable to this industry, and which is now the taxi industry, in that it falls outside the coverage of the small businesses relief packages established by government, the state has made an effort to accommodate the taxi industry. Now, with all of these companies that I've actually mentioned, the taxi industry falls outside that. So, government has deemed it appropriate to establish a dedicated relief support for the taxi industry. This industry is the largest carrier of passengers across all modes of transport. The taxi industry moves approximately 15.6 million passenger journeys on a daily basis, accounting for moving 68% or 5.4 million passengers daily. It is estimated that this industry generates in excess of 40 billion rand per annum, with approximately anything between 250,000 to 300,000 taxis that generate approximately 350,000 direct and indirect job opportunities. This includes drivers, rank marshals, and other administrative support staff. Currently, there are 137,000 legal taxis operating in the country, with the relevant and valid operating licenses as registered in the Department Land Transport Information System, OLAS. We also estimate, based on the last audit undertaken, that there are approximately 113 taxis operating illegally with the receipts. There are taxis that operate with receipts, but not on the OLAS system. So you've got to understand that as proof that they have applied for operating licenses with the relevant provincial authorities. And that is what backlog we are still dealing with. It should be emphasized that the fact that you have applied for a permit does not automatically mean that you are issued with a permit. There are about 25,000 registered metered taxi operators countrywide and about 63,188 e-hailing driver operators, as well as 1,900 cross-border taxi operators registered in South Africa. All this was duly considered by government in considering the eligibility and requisite support that government might outlay to the taxi industry. Government has duly considered the negative impact of the disaster management regulations in response to COVID-19 pandemic on the taxi industry due to the following reasons: a 30% reduction in the loading passenger capacity, prohibition of inter-provincial travel, and thereby the stoppage of long-distance taxi operations, and the closure of border and thereby the prohibition of cross-border taxi operations. Restricted operating times for taxis and the targeted transportation of essential workers during the lockdown, level 5. All of the above, this meant that the taxi industry was operating less than 60% of its fleet size and carried 30% less of its license carrying capacity. Almost 20% or more of the taxi industry experienced total loss of income. This is particularly true of the long distance and cross-border operators who are directly affected by the closure of land borders and the prohibition of the inter-provincial travel. Now, we must not confuse that with those who have broken the law and did illegal stuff. We're talking strictly what is in the regulations. There will be those who wanted to circumvent the regulations and basically go around, dark roads that are not national roads to avoid the interprovincial roadblocks. You will have those in a number of provinces who would have attempted to do that. And what you had as an altercation between the Eastern Cape as well as the Western Cape in relation to cross-border travel, when they are not supposed to be going to the Eastern Cape except for funerals and all of that. But you know, in the Eastern Cape, Western Cape relationship, the majority of Eastern Cape inhabitants are working in Cape Town. So the people you see in Samora Machel and Marikana, all those congested townships in the Western Cape are coming from the Eastern Cape, coming to Cape Town to seek for jobs and all of that, as job seekers and all of that. So this is what in history they were referred to as refugees, which is a concept we rejected because nobody is a refugee in the Republic of South Africa. Anyone can go anywhere else to look for jobs. It is only under apartheid that you had people who were referred to as illegal immigrants in their own country when they came to the city of gold to look for jobs. We have therefore agreed to provide relief to the industry in the form of a once-off ex gratia payment to taxi operators. It should be emphasized that this is not compensation for loss of revenue as a result of COVID-19 restrictions, but rather assistance by government within the available resources and means, like all other industries. In the 500 billion, in the 100 billion, in the 5 billion, 1 billion has been set aside to assist the taxi industry, but rather assistance by government within the available resources and means. This relief must be equally looked at through a long-term view of the opportunity created by COVID-19 pandemic to achieve long-term sustainability of the industry through formalization and ultimately subsidization. We need to subsidize the taxi industry. I've given you the statistics in terms of how many people does the industry carry. If like today, the railway services in the country are not operational, you can imagine all the people today are dependent on the taxi industry to go to work. And I've given you the statistics of the numbers of how many people does this industry carry. And that is why we must understand subsidization in that context. We in government agree that we must subsidize the taxi industry, and then we must formalize, even though the taxi industry believes that that formalization has been done on ad hoc. But with our discussions, 26 years of freedom, we are going back to that discussion with the taxi industry in the indaba that we are going to. Ingqungquthela ngesixhosa eyono taxi abantu abaphethe itaxi in the country to look at these issues and reach an agreement with government on these particular matters. The government proposal on the taxi relief support had taken the following into consideration. Relief will be accessible to all taxi operators irrespective of affiliation across. Relief will focus on legal taxi operators with valid operating licenses. We have now accepted the representations of the taxi industry to accommodate those with receipts. Now, there are those who've got receipts, if we talk legality, who will not be accommodated. In the discussions, we have agreed that even those with receipts must also be accommodated in terms of this, as proof that they had applied for operating licenses. But these have not been finalized by our provincial regulatory entities. This category will need to be fully registered and issued with operating permits first based on the existing requirements by the provincial registration entities. Although some taxi operators are owner-drivers, the assumption for purposes of the relief will be one taxi driver per taxi. We have now accepted that relief should be based on each permit rather than the ownership patterns. The relief will be an all-inclusive relief scheme that will also cover owners, drivers, rank managers, marshals, and other taxi associations workers. The relief support process has provided an opportunity to advance the formalization of the taxi industry. This process is a subject of an ongoing engagement with the leadership structures of the taxi industry. We have taken note of the objections of the taxi industry to the effect that the relief support and the formalization processes should be delinked. The taxi industry has made representations to us that they are vehemently opposed to the conditions set down for access to the relief support. These conditions set down by government include the following. The taxi operations must be formally registered as a business entity. The registered business must have a business banking account in which the relief allowance will be paid into. These businesses must be registered for income tax and other applicable taxes related to running a business in South Africa. The registration process also includes registration of employees with the Unemployment Insurance Fund, the Compensation Commission, and for the Skills Development Levy. And they must be in possession of a valid operating license or a receipt as a proof of application for an operating license. Such receipts must have been issued before 28 February 2020. The Department of Transport had also agreed with the National Treasury to designate the South African Revenue Services as the implementing agency to register and administer the relief to the taxi industry due to their proven capacity in handling transactions of this nature. We'll open our electronic gateways on eNaTIS, which is Electronic National Traffic Information System, which is our data, and OLAS, Operating License Administration System, systems to SARS to enable them to validate vehicle and operating license information. As part of this process to ensure that there is no fraud in the distribution of funds to beneficiaries. Now you will know that the 350 promise by government to the unemployed is being stuck in the system precisely because of formalization. That everybody is unemployed, but others are beneficiaries already in the system. And therefore, it means if ever the Department of Social Development, like the Minister explained, they don't clean up the data and the system, you will have people who double up. Today, they get a social grant, tomorrow they get the 350. And yet the 350 is meant for the unemployed. So the reason why money is not being spent on giving people, among others, it is that system. So the distribution of funds also can stagnate the implementation of the principle of supporting the relief fund for the industry. In contextualizing the taxi relief support, it is important to understand that this is amongst the largest relief packages for any economic subsectors provided for by government. Government has offered the taxi industry a relief package of 1.135 billion. Reaching agreement within government for this relief support for the taxi industry was a difficult process that involved extensive lobbying and convincing the relevant authorities on the importance and the need for this fund. Most of the special relief funds for subsectors provides on average maximums of about 350 million in comparison to what's on offer the taxi industry. The industry has further requested that the Department of Transport should review the regulations and directions to allow for the loading capacity to be increased from the current 70% to 100% with all passengers wearing masks and with regular sanitization of vehicles after each journey as mitigation measures. This is not a matter the Department of Transport can finalize on its own and will need to be discussed by the net joints and the National Coronavirus Command Council for its consideration, and then a response will be provided to the taxi industry. A commitment I've made that immediately after the Command Council have provided answers on this particular matter, we'll be able to report on that next week on Tuesday or Wednesday in between. Because the National Coronavirus Command Council, chaired by the President, meet weekly. The net joints this week will get our representations that we believe in transport that we must move to 100% with masks. Initially, when I came with 100%, I was vandalized for this because questions were asked as to what guarantees do I have that every person inside the taxi will have masks? And what guarantees do I have that everybody will have to sanitize? Now, our regulations going forward will have to address that. Besides, putting on a mask now, it is mandatory, isn't it? Like we are in this press conference and everywhere else, that everybody, it is mandatory that they should put on a mask. And the Department of Health have said that it is no longer compulsory that you must have these masks, which masks are surgical masks that are used in theaters and other areas. It meant that a piece of cloth around your mouth and covering your nose to prevent any droplets or coughing that you can have inside the taxi so that you are actually covered. But sanitization in the taxi is and should be mandatory because you exchange hands, money exchange hands inside the taxi, starting from the last person and all of that. And I must explain this, that when you leave the taxi rank, you leave the taxi rank with 70%. But along the route, you end up 100%. That's what happens on daily level, because the taxis don't only operate from a rank. They operate in that route where you operate from. You are basically picking up people as and when they are available to their own destination. So when you get into the taxi, all the time, you must sanitize, because you are going to touch money that comes to from somebody who she or he is not aware that he's got corona, but is inside the taxi, he's not coughing. Now, it is compulsory that that money exchange from the driver of the taxi, you must have this. And you must have the cloth. You can only take a breather when you are in an open space and alone. And then you can then put off a mask, because the mask also is quite uncomfortable. But in the taxi, why do you have to open your mouth? You've got to close your mouth all the time in the taxi and keep quiet and just deal with money as and when it is requested by the driver in front. Keep quiet, put on your mask. In the taxi, in the bus, that's what we need. So we believe we will present that we must move to 100%. We believe that we must open up for long distance, because we have also opened for airlines to go around the country and all of that. We believe that we must open for trains. We must also open for taxis, interprovincial. And that is what we need to do. We will be guided in terms of the differentiated approach for the hotspots. There are hotspots in terms of travel that we may want to restrict, not we may want, we will restrict travel. For instance, travel between Cape Town and Johannesburg is very risky because those people are affected and all of that. But we're able to control that on air because people travel for business, and as you go to the airport, we're able to check on you. And we're also looking at other measures, including other measures with the health sector that we can apply at the airport in terms of infection testing, not screening. Like you do with HIV and AIDS, you prick, and then in no time, it can tell you with your blood right there and there. In no time, it can tell you whether you are HIV positive and all of that. And you can even do it at home at all times. And if by mistake you happen to be involved with somebody, you can go and check yourself whether or not you are HIV positive and so on, and take precautions in that regard. So in this instance, those are the measures we'll actually have to improve. So in the taxi industry also, we'll have to intensify those. So in our view, as the Department of Transport, we're going to place that. But because we've got many minds, you have been told by the President yesterday that the Medical Advisory Council to the Minister and Government is constituted by 51, 53 people who are all astute, medical practitioners and epidemiologists and scientists. So you can imagine those minds under one roof. They don't come all the time with the same answer and so on. But we accept what is consensus in terms of what they say and what we present to them. So we believe that we can go to 100% for the buses and the taxis going forward. The taxi industry has also requested the Department of Transport to allow inter-provincial travel of taxis and for cross-border operations. Similarly, these too will be subjected to the intra-governmental processes outlined above, and to this extent I've undertaken to report back to the taxi industry in the coming week on the feedback of my engagement with the colleagues on the proposals. I was also requested to intercede on behalf of the operators who are clients of South African Taxi Finance to ask for a moratorium on vehicle repossessions and also on an extended repayment holiday for taxi operators in distress. And I've had a fruitful meeting this past week with South African Taxi Finance, and we have received encouraging and positive feedback from SA Taxi Finance that they will put a moratorium in place and also extend their initial 1 month repayment holiday by a further 2 months to aid in alleviating the difficult position the taxi industry finds itself in as a result of COVID pandemic. The Department of Transport will finalize its work and will in due course announce the date on which payments in respect of the available relief will start. Now, this is the total brief of relief and how we are intervening, informed by the President's announcement on the 500 billion and how we are handling that 500 billion in relation to our industry. Now, our biggest Achilles heels in terms of the industry we are operating in, it is the taxi industry in relation to formalization and making it easy for us to even get government support from UIF and all of that. Now, we have had to create a separate dispensation specifically for that. And we know that in terms of our discussions, it is not all agreed with regard to the SARS approach. Like I explained, that the taxi industry does not agree with that, but we have explained that government, from its own perspective, this is how it sees paying out the relief fund. So we're not going to establish a body to basically do this thing. It's a simple matter of there is money and it goes straight to the person and to the pocket. So the breakdown of that ex gratia is going to be about 5,000 per taxi and all of that, and it is once off. So it cannot be calculated in the entire duration of the lockdown. So it is 1.135 billion rand that has been set aside for the taxi industry. Even in that, there's been argument about whether it is enough, and others saying they want 20,000. Now, it is not possible to have 20,000, because if you say 20,000 per taxi, when we do our calculation, it adds up to 10 billion rand. Government will not have any 10 billion rand in its kitty to basically provide to the taxi industry. It's not possible. The attack on us by the virus and our response to it has been informed by goodwill and sacrifices at all levels. And industries have fallen apart. And we are facing situations of about 22,000 or so people losing their jobs at Adcon, which houses Edgar's and also houses JET and all of that. And this is what we are saying in the 500 billion which the president has pronounced. Such industries must be saved if it is possible for us to save them. Because losing 22,000 people in the streets, you can imagine the devastating effect that will have on us in terms of high rate of unemployment. So the 500 billion is supposed to intervene in such industries as well. But at the same time, to try not even to alleviate, I know that amount of money will still not be enough. But where we are heading to, it is the long term of subsidization of this industry and formalization. Because that is what must be sorted out. And that should be done not as quick as possible. It should be done based on our negotiations and our discussions and agree on that. Otherwise, the taxi industry will forever be what it is. And I know once we talk about SARS, other people think of other things, how it will impact on them going forward and so on. But formalization will help the industry a great deal. Because now when we are attacked by emergencies like COVID-19, all those marshals and the drivers in the industry will become beneficiaries of the UIF because they are registered employed people in the system. So that is what will actually happen. But this is an industry, 40 billion rand industry annually. And we've got to see that in practical terms, in terms of monetary terms, translated into livelihood and all of that. And I know that we're raised by the taxi industry. We went to school and supported by the taxi industry. It put food and bread on the table to this day. And it is one such industry that require our attention. And at the same time, intervention by government, but not government alone, working hand in hand with the industry as a whole. All the beneficiaries in relation to this relief will have to be South African. So it's not going to be a relief for people who are not South African, either in e-hailing, metered taxi, or minibus taxis. They've got to prove that they are South African if they have to benefit out of this relief. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Indeed, transport is the heartbeat of economic growth and social development. As you've heard the Minister say that the taxi industry is an integral part of mobility in South Africa. It cannot be left to chance. It will not be left to chance. It will be assisted as much as humanly possible within the confines of the fiscus. Minister, we have a couple of questions that have come in via WhatsApp. I'm going to start with this one from Zeb. Zeb Mutobela is from Taxi Times. Minister, Zeb would like to know, did Santaco and the Department of Transport decide on the way it will distribute the funds? How much will each stakeholder in the taxi industry receive? He puts there in brackets the taxi owner, the driver, the association staff, etc. And Zeb would also like to know, will the taxi industry become better governed now that government is supporting the industry financially? And then we also have a question from Govind Whittle from ENCA. Minister Govind would like to know, more specifically, are these decisions that the minister has announced today around the taxi relief, are these decisions already signed, sealed, delivered? Have they been concluded? Are they already made? Or does this still need to be given the green light by the National Command Council? We have a question from Pitso. Pitso is from Westside FM. Minister Pitso would like to know, since it's been said that the taxi fares will increase, he gives a couple of figures. He says 7 Rand in parts for long distance and local distance with the amount of 50 Rand. Also, he's thrown a couple of numbers there, but the basic crux of his question is, are the taxi operators still going to continue with the increase in fares? And the minister's response to that. And then we have from the SABC, Criselda Lewis, wanting to know, Minister, you said that government has offered the taxi industry a relief package of 1.135 billion. Has this been accepted by the sector, or are negotiations still ongoing? Criselda also has a follow-up to that, saying there were demands for 20,000 Rand per taxi. You say it's about 5,000 Rand in relief per taxi. Are you not afraid that this will lead to a shutdown as already threatened by the industry? For now, Minister, those are the questions that we have. It's over to you.
To start with ZEP, how much will each get? I've explained that this will be broken down to 5,000 per taxi, and is ex gratia, is once off. So it's not a compensation for the loss of income. It is a once off ex gratia support to the industry. Now, we can't even begin to compare that to the loss, because the loss is huge. If we were to compensate for the loss, it will add up to not a couple of billions of rands from the fiscus. So a relief fund that has been set aside, we argued also for the taxi industry. Now, you will know that there are billions set aside, which I've explained, and there are billions even in terms of that have been set aside for small businesses to access. The taxi industry is unable to access that because even before they make an application for that, the system kicks them out because they are not formalized. Now, when we put aside 1.135 billion, we put the conditionalities to help the process of formalization. Now, a driver's company, learner's driver's company that operates somewhere in the Eastern Cape in Goa, it is registered with the tax. And therefore, it is eligible by all means to have access, given the period that they have not been able to do whatever that they are supposed to do, to ask for relief from government. Now, all of those industries have actually been doing that. You would have seen that there are reports that such they have also been rejected. In the Department of Transport, I've put aside a capacity to help those to access the relief fund within the allocated resources. Now, the reason why the taxi industry cannot access those resources, it is because all of these things that I've mentioned in terms of a registered business and all of that do not actually exist as we speak in terms of that particular industry. And that is why we set aside the relief support. And it will help everybody who needs to be assisted through this particular process to be in a position to gain access to this support. Decisions made by NCC. NCC makes decisions And I've explained that on Tuesday we will place all of this before the NCC. But the NCC have been briefed about the 1.135 billion. And the NCC itself understand quite clearly that government can't go beyond what it has placed to relieve the taxi industry. And the conditionalities of SARS and all of that, that goes with how this money is going to be disbursed to those who are eligible, have also been placed by NCC. So what NCC will consider is in relation to, among others, our discussions with the taxi industry, where they further raised their issues. Which minister will do that? I will do that next week on Tuesday, but also through the net joints. So the DG will present through the net joints some of the feedback from the taxi industry, but we cannot go beyond the quantum of 1.135 billion rand. And I'm explaining this because it was a matter of discussion in the public discourse that government is allocating 1 billion, and then the taxi industry wants 20,000 per taxi per month over a period of time. That is not possible from the point of view of the fiscus. If we were to take 10 billion rand and allocate it to this, you can imagine that we will be taking 10 billion rand from already allocated money to other industries. Remember, it is not only the taxi industry has got this dispensation because it is outside the formal arrangement. So if I were to take 10 billion and allocate it, then it means we must comply all the time with all of this, and then it means I am disadvantaging those who are eligible by all means, and who the money already is allocated to them. I mean, we've got industries in the whole picture who some of them have gone to zero, basically to nothing. If you look at arts and culture, it is nothing compared to the loss that one artist will lose from live performances that they rely on. There will be no discos, there will be no gigs for the rest of their lives, probably. If COVID-19 is still with us and we are not allowed to get to a festival, to listen to Casper Nyovest filling up another stadium. So you can imagine how much loss does he make. That 150 million probably is his income alone. And you can imagine, El Vovo sends stories every day about he have not even seen a cent of that amount of money. So, people will have to make ends meet, discourse, lockdown party there and there, sponsored by Hunters, which is alcohol. Guys have got to make some money, ends meet on the table. You can imagine. And then you look at the biggest industry, tourism. Minister Kubai, I mean 200 million to people in hospitality who used to make how much per month? Obviously, over 20 million turnover in hospitality. Maybe one, hotel. Throughout the 3 months total shutdown, how much will they get? What will they make? Some of them have closed down. The other day I read Tsuhosan is closing, facing liquidation and all of that. Now, taxi industry is going to survive. It's going to survive with what could be little but something on the table. Formalization, subsidization. This is a sunrise industry. It's not sunset, sunrise. And with 40 billion rand turnover annually, you can imagine if it was professionalized, what will it be? Where will we be in relation to this particular industry? It's not an easy issue, for reasons that we can explain, but it is to the benefit of the industry in the long term. increase, what is Pizzo saying? You will tell me. And then Criselda is 135 accepted. Of course, it won't be accepted. The industry told me in my face that they don't agree with that. And I've told them that we will not move. And I've gone back to government to look at the possibility of increase. The government will not move on that 1.135 because that's where we end. That's where we started at 800 billion. Not 800. We started at 800 million and then to 1.135 billion to increase. We increased with 200 million to round it up at 1.135. I know people attack the industry and say that, no, you know, they must do this and do that. I don't think this is the time for that. We must go over this hassle. And we've got a bigger task in the industry to address formalization and address all the challenges that we're faced with. And we need to get back to business as quick as we can and get back to the table on all of these issues. The industry did not agree on these matters with me, Criselda, and I briefed them about this amount, and we have been in negotiations with them back and forth on this, and they've put their issues on the table and all of that. It can never be enough if you calculate the marshal, the driver, and all of that. And then others will even compare that, but at least some of them were operational. Even during the lockdown, they were operational, limited hours and all of that. I don't want even to venture into that discussion because to me it is nothing. It is nothing because they've made a big sacrifice to come to the party. And remember, the sacrifices we made was to save human lives. And we are told now the numbers of dead people and the numbers of infection could have skyrocketed long time ago. Now, the numbers are going to increase according to health. But when they increase, we should be in a position to fight back. We've got beds. They might not be enough, but we have had a space to have beds. This is essentially a health matter. Now, if we did not shut down at that time to flatten the curve, and then we are visited by this and we are overwhelmed by numbers like Italy, where will we be to fight back? We now know where the problem is, where are the hotspots. We know that we are going to grow exponentially, and how are we going to fight that off? And then building the capacity within the system to push that back. Now, Dr. Mkhize says yesterday, we must not be shocked when the numbers increase. They are going to increase. Me, you, and all others. This morning I was told that a comrade of mine in the Western Cape, very close to us and in the ANC, have passed on. It's not the only one. COVID-19, young. Okay? And it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to grow. And then when it grows, we must be able to have a capacity for all our people to be able to be absorbed and live out of it. We've got about over 39,000 people who have recovered in the system. It's because of the work of health workers. Remember, as we fight this, they are also survivors. And they did not survive on their own. They survived because of our health workers, who some of them have, got infected. But over and above that, there is no cure. But there is medicine on the side that we can use now, just like you get grandpa for everything. Now, there is something that has been announced, and then that if you've got COVID-19, you take that, your chances even of survival are 100% guaranteed. So, those are good developments in this fight. It's not an easy one, like others want to make us believe. And it's not a defensive thing. Once we start to be on the defense, then we're getting it wrong, and we're getting it politicized, and we're missing the point, because there's nobody who's got answers. Where I know people are politicking about COVID, it's in the US because they are facing an election. So a president this coming week or coming days will fill up a hall full of people irrespective. So there's been a back and forth. We've got it here in South Africa about opening the industry, not opening the industry. It was all hunky-dory when we started. But when the going gets tough and others start to look at the political mileage and others start to look at the economic aspects, all vested interests come to the fore, but government must govern. And at the end of the day, the economy must open. It must open gradually. Now, when we open the economy and then we get kids get infected in the schools, it's not an act of stupidity and using kids as a guinea pig. As a government, is how are we going to react and overcome that? You know, and overcome the fact that schools are closing down, kids are getting infected. If you've got more than 10,000 kids in one school, it is possible that they will be infected. Our education system, COVID-19 arrived, other schools, kids are studying still under the trees. In other schools, toilets are not up to speed. Other schools, there are no toilets. There's no water. And we've got to bring in measures, temporary measures. When COVID arrives, people don't have water in Zingi. And then we've got to get water to the people for temp. And that is why people have been raising, can we sustain some of the measures of COVID-19 that came at speed? Yes, government must sustain them, because we have been able to do things that we could not have imagined being done in a normal environment. Like 2010 World Cup, we're able to build stadiums record time, and everybody asked, oh, this was for the cameras. After the cameras, we're back to our own ways. It was for 2010. Can what happened in 2010, infrastructure work and all of that, continue? We did that because it cushioned us from our economic point of view. Recession came globally and went past us because of our infrastructure program for 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Can that be sustained? Is what we're trying to do right now as we speak. Can what we're doing in COVID-19 ensure that people who are drunk on the roads, they stay behind the bus? Because nobody was drunk on the roads for some time. There were no accidents. Can that be sustained in terms of our laws? Yes, it is sustainable. We have seen it. And that is why our bill that is before Parliament now, to take alcohol to zero, no longer 5%. And only South African Catholic Bishops' Conference opposed that. But we said that we want 0% in terms of alcohol in the blood, 0% alcohol in the blood. And so that's where we are going. And then shut down the industry. There's no need for shutdown. There's no need for shutdown and demands, because you demand what you can actually access. Now, government will not get any resources beyond this, even if they can be shut down. We need to get back to business and get the taxi industry going in our country. So anyone who promotes shutdown, it is counterproductive. It will not work for our country. It will shatter the working class in this country who are using taxis. It will basically also shatter the taxi industry going forward, already, which has been highly affected by the shutdown and the lockdown from an economic point of view. So we don't need a shutdown. we will strongly discourage the shutdown in this particular instance, because there will be no money that will come from anywhere. Minister Mboweni is going to present a budget. He will tell us a story, but what I've read, they say that Mboweni says we are not as rich as we thought. We are not. And you can imagine the revenue we are losing as a result of our activities in the COVID-19. Where will the money come from? So you demand what you know you can achieve. That by a clock there is money. So where will the money come from? So if there's anything else, let's get back to business and get moving. And then let's get back to the new normal. Okay, the question of Pito, it's the fare increase. We've been briefed by the industry that on the 1st of July, there will be a fare increase and it will be fair to everybody. And they briefed us that it is something that they do annually based on inflation and also the state of living and the cost of living in the Republic. They do this annually. It's only that they announced it now during COVID-19 that it became a boomerang, so to say, because we all expected to cut back. So I have said that I will oppose anything that is unfair to our people as a minister, and to an extent that I will look at what is at my disposal to challenge such. I'm now before the Competition Commission, taken there by the taxi industry, also in relation to some of the issues that they've raised. So should the fares that will be introduced in July that are not fair to our people, we will take them to the Competition Commission to look at that. But we don't need to get there. I am satisfied as the minister about such a pronouncement about the increase. I was briefed by the industry that it is something that happens all the time. I've taken up the matter with them and seek briefing on the increase in terms of fares. I've seen this happening in Alexander, where it was announced that the taxi industry in Alexander is going to increase the fares to almost 300%. 300% to 172% to 300% increase in that. And I think the industry players and the organizations have attended to that and have given a feedback that that is probably what has basically made people to be quite not comfortable with this because of that. But normally, when you increase the fares, you announce. And then they will do that as the industry and inform everybody. So the way it came about, it was as though it's a spite, because of COVID-19, people must then begin to pay for all of the sins of COVID-19. 30% loss because of 70% and all of that. So we are going to move to the new normal, and that will include all of these things the taxi industry have raised with us, the review of the regulations to 100%. So we're going to look into that, and the net joints will consider that and report to the NCCC.
Thank you so much, Minister. In the absence of any more questions, I do believe that we can conclude, unless there's any final word that you would like to add. Minister, happy?
No, I'm happy. If there is no further questions, I think we have settled there with the report back we have actually given.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, thank you once again for joining us, the very few who were able to come today. Thank you very much for those who have tuned in via live streaming on the various platforms. We do appreciate your input and your